Let's start with the before lecture chant. An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas, having it to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to start another journey together, this time guided by the wisdom of Roshi Joan Halifax, founder, abbot, and head teacher of the Paya Zen Center, an institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this is a journey through her book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. And I don't know what image is coming up in your mind when you think of this, but the book cover itself is quite able to give us a feeling. This is, you can't really see it very well, but this is kind of like El Capitan right here, this monolithic piece of granite. And then there's all this mist and darkness down here at the bottom. And even if that's not the picture in your mind of her title, you might feel the familiarity of what this picture depicts. These edges where opposites meet, where fear can meet courage, suffering meets freedom. The solid ground beneath our feet on the mountain path suddenly ends with us facing a granite wall. These edge states where spaces and opposites meet, where our potential for a vast and view and perspective also, of course, relies on our awareness, lest we slip and fall, which we do, of course, over and over. I think it helps to understand also, thinking of this title, a bit about Roshi's background. She was an activist and organizer during the civil rights and Vietnam War movements of the 60s. She's a medical anthropologist, and she's done a lot of work in large medical institutions as well as hospitals, and a lot of work with within the educational system. She spent a lot of her life at the bedside of those who are dying and with their families, and also a lot of time volunteering in maximum security prisons. And she's collaborated over the decades with neurosurgeons and social psychologists, creating compassion-based projects, and has been running health clinics in the most remote areas of the Himalayas for decades. All to say, she has varied experiences in her life, and obviously many more than I'm mentioning here. But those have shaped her, obviously educated her, and given her a perspective that makes such a title and such a book possible. Let's just say she's been there and back over and over. And these experiences gave rise to the understanding of the value of seeing the big picture. All of it, the depths and the heights. She has fallen over the edge many times to come back and understand over and over again the importance, she says, of seeing the entire landscape of life and not rejecting or denying what we are given. In fact, as we know and talk about often, our difficulties, our falling over the edge, and our sincere investigation of these moments can and do contribute to a more courageous, inclusive, and wise view of reality, in her words. So through her decades of inquiry and practice, Roshi came to identify 5 important qualities, what she terms heart and mind assets, that are keys to leading a life of compassion and courage. Qualities that she deems so vital, in fact, that she says without them, we could not serve nor survive. But these qualities also course, have some shadow sides. If they deteriorate, they have the potential to do harm to ourselves and others. Thus, she turns these opposing realities, if you will, edge states. And the 5 are altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, and engagement. And over the coming weeks, we'll be looking at each of these in some detail in relation to our own lives and our own experiences. But briefly, I just like to say a sentence or two about each one, so you know where we're going. So altruism is usually identified by actions of selflessness that serves others, and is essential, in Roshi's words, to the well-being of society and the natural world. But these actions sometimes can turn to become harmful to the very people and the very institutions that we're serving. She calls this pathological altruism, and we'll be discussing that today. Empathy, our ability to feel the suffering of another person, has the ability, obviously, to bring us closer together and to broaden our understanding of the entire world, really. But as some of you may know, I know I do, we can take on too much of another person's suffering or identify too closely with it, thus harming ourselves and restricting our potential for compassionate action, especially in the moment. Thirdly, she talks about integrity, the quality of having strong moral principles that guide our life. However, and you might think of times in your life, you might experience what's called moral suffering if we find ourselves witnessing or engaging in acts that violate these very principles for our own sense of justice. Respect, the 4th, according to Roshi, is a way that we hold beings and things in high regard. But we may find that respect erodes very quickly when we compromise our values or behave in disparaging ways towards others and towards ourselves. And lastly is engagement in our work, whatever that might be, which often brings, obviously, a great sense of purpose and meaning to our lives. But perhaps also, most of us have experienced at some time in our own work how easily work can become overwork, and how easily overwork can become burnout. So as we think about these 5 qualities, we will look at each of them a little bit further in detail in the weeks ahead. And I know that when we're talking about them, we'll all be able to recall moments in our lives where we found ourselves at this precipice, and we tended or fell into the shadow side. And I also can imagine that with time and perspective, or perhaps this happened even spontaneously in the moment, it does. We are able to learn and grow from all of these experiences. And I really like this thought from the book, Roshi's words. Losing our footing and sliding down the slope of harm need not be a terminal catastrophe. Our difficulties, end quote, our difficulties can provide valuable opportunities to gain wisdom and strength. As you know, no mud, no lotus. We often find ourselves on this high edge, sometimes with more awareness of falling than at other times, but it is here at this edge we can learn to recognize and rediscover our footing, and where we can also recognize just how easy it might be to lose it. And sometimes we fall, but we can become aware of those tenuous moments. And importantly, refrain from judging ourselves about them. Because over time, we cultivate a greater sense of the perspective and the resilience that allows us to know when we are at that edge and when we are in danger of falling over. Allows us a greater awareness of when we've gone over the edge, and then how we might make it back to the higher edge. And of course, one way that we can help ourselves to be able to do this is actually the premise of the book. Is to look more deeply at each of these 5 edge states and broaden our understanding of them, all to gain a greater view. A vast view can, in fact, as we know, open anywhere. Heartfelt conversations with a loved one, at the bedside of a sick child, first time you notice a parent's mind changing, looking deeply into the face of a just bloomed flower. It opens everywhere and anywhere, anytime. So working with edge states can be a very fertile ground on which to practice. And it seems like compassion, again, becomes the key, at least according to Roshi. We can be reminded of and resourced by our basic Buddha nature, our basic goodness, as our view encompasses everything. A grandmother's loving embrace and a cancer patient dying alone in a hospital. The beautiful mountain landscapes that many of us live in, and the devastation of these landscapes by wildfires. The meeting of opposites and how we stay grounded within them, finding compassion and freedom and the best of our own characters. This is standing at the edge. So let's take a closer look at the first one, altruism. In Roshi's words, to act altruistically is to take unselfish actions that enhance the welfare of others, and very often at some cost or some risk to our own well-being. At its best, if we act from altruism, we are not seeking any kind of approval or recognition from others, nor are we acting altruistically in order to make ourselves feel better. Suzuki Roshi has said that those acting from pure altruism have, his words, no gaining ideas, not before, not during, nor after any action, nothing to gain. There is a case, of course, to be made that pure altruism actually doesn't really exist, that we almost, as humans, we probably always have some sort of personal agenda. Maybe our ego is always involved. But in Buddhism, we've learned something about this. We've learned that altruism and compassion can be free of the ego, this small self. And in fact, this kind of selfless concern for others is actually part of our original being, our true Buddha nature. Every Sunday, we chant the Metta Sutta, in which there is the line, even as a mother at the risk of her life, watches over and protects her only child. This combination of altruism and compassion. And we can acknowledge that everyone has these seeds deep within them, ready to be nurtured and to grow. It takes really very little effort to think of examples of altruism. We can see them and hear about them every day. People sort of spontaneously putting themselves in harm's way to help others. Someone rushing up to a car that's on fire to help the driver to safety before it explodes. Or so often now we see on the news people running into the streets to help neighbors, buried amongst rubble from bombs or from earthquakes. These people often say that they did what anyone would have done. They did what needed to be done without thinking, often anonymously. You maybe immediately might think that this is a great act of courage, and it certainly is courageous, of course. But it is also importantly containing selflessness and the will to positively affect, save lives in this case, the welfare of another human being. It's altruistic. We can think of so many obvious acts of altruism, small and grand alike, around us and throughout our lives and history. I was thinking about when I was writing this, it was interesting to me that through my life, I retained the feelings in my body and the details of a specific memory from my childhood when I was about 6. And I just really remember so vividly this particular moment. It was a really hot summer afternoon in Madeira, where I grew up. And my sister and I were in the house. Sister's 2 years older than me, getting relief from the valley heat. And we both heard at the same time the tune played by the ice cream truck coming down the street. And so I said, oh, I'm gonna go get us some treats, so ask Mom for some coins. And as I was outside waiting my turn, I thought, okay, I know my sister's favorite ice cream is, I don't know what you call it, but it's ice cream on a stick and it has orange covering. It's a popsicle kind of thing. So anyway, that was her absolute favorite.
50-50 bar.
Thank you, 50-50 bar. I don't know if they come in other than orange back in the 50s, but anyway, her favorite was orange. My favorite was something called a drumstick, which still exists, which is a cone with vanilla ice cream and chocolate on the top and nuts. And we didn't get to have these treats very often, but this one I just absolutely loved so much. So very excited about this. So I paid and I ran back into the house and I stood in front of my sister. And just after an ever so brief moment, not of hesitation, not even more than just one breath's worth, I held up both treats. I said, which one do you want? She picked the drumstick. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. I sat down and I enjoyed this popsicle and she enjoyed the drumstick. But now I can see that something did happen. It's not dramatic and it's not in a moment of grave danger or consequence like the altruistic examples we can come up with that we have seen and experienced. But I understood with such a clarity at that age that these seeds of altruism and compassion were within me, although I couldn't name them as such, of course. And I learned how easy it was to water them. A simple, selfless act without much consequence in the moment at all. And obviously not much risk either, other than what a child might perceive in not getting what they want. But I'm not sharing this story as a great example of altruism, but more like just that we have these altruistic and compassionate tendencies already deeply rooted within us. And we've been nurturing each of them all of our lives. And they have the potential to sprout in every moment. And by recognizing them, we get better at allowing them and opening to them. But altruism can shift. It can go from a kind of selfless goodness into something else, such as feelings of obligation or fear or burnout. Our actions can appear altruistic, but our motivation may not be well-grounded. And the result is what Roshi terms pathological altruism. And it isn't difficult to understand this. We can easily, I think, see how it could happen and what it might look like. And in fact, it was during a talk by Roshi, during the chaplaincy program. She had a brief talk about edge states that I really came to understand this concept more clearly. She had said there are harmful forms of serving others, ways in which we inadvertently hurt those we serve by disempowering them, by taking away their agency, And I felt like I had been punched in the stomach because my body was reacting to time when those months that my mother was in the skilled nursing facility. I've talked about this before, but it hadn't been clear to me, but suddenly it was. The decisions I made in the name of her well-being had actually taken something from her. One day, we had made the decision to, go to the store. This is a time when she was still able to walk with a walker. We went into a clothing store to look for some clothes for her. We were wandering around a bit, and she really didn't seem all that interested, but I knew that we needed to buy something new, that she really did want some clean, unstained clothes, something that felt nice on her body. She'd feel better, I knew. But at one point she said to me, what I would really like is to buy something for you. I said, Mom, let's get you something. This is about you. I don't need anything. And she was disappointed. I was not listening. And she said it again later. And, we were kind of in a rush and we were both hungry. And again, I said, Mom, I don't want any clothes, but this is something we can do for you today. And I looked up and I saw the woman at the cashier stand, close to my age, just looking at me. And who knows what was in her mind, but it triggered some shame in mine about how this whole thing was unfolding. But surprisingly, I didn't change. I helped my mother blindly, not willing to see really what she needed. Mired in the duty of it, the obligation of it, day after day, serving and feeling it as a duty and not feeling it as the beauty that it was. And there are many more. The idea of fixing and helping rather than serving people, putting our needs in front rather than the needs of the person we're serving. But I think that once we become aware of this side of altruism, we can't unsee it. Its potential is there in our most intimate relationships and our most casual ones, in the most dire moments and the most lighthearted moments. But if we can learn to view and experience altruism as an edge, we become more aware of both states, all the edge states, and how it can turn into something else that is not serving the moment or the purpose. So next week, we'll continue a little bit looking more at altruism, including ways that it undermines our own needs. And we'll take a closer look at how to identify and practice with edge states as we continue to stand at the edge together.